Archaeologists discovered an ancient photo near the Brooklyn Bridge and uncovered a hidden message. Before we start, just a reminder, if you enjoy this kind of content, subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get to the video. The excavation. Sarah Chen wiped the sweat from her brow as she carefully brushed dirt away from what appeared to be a metal container buried beneath the construction site near the Brooklyn Bridge. The October morning was unseasonably warm, and the urban archaeology team had been working since dawn to document artifacts before the new subway extension project continued. Urban archaeology in New York City was always a race against time and development. Every construction project that broke ground in Manhattan had the potential to uncover pieces of the city's layered history, from Native American settlements to colonial Dutch artifacts to remnants of the immigrant communities that had shaped the metropolis. Sarah's team from Columbia University had been called in when construction workers had discovered what appeared to be a deliberately buried cache of items dating to the early 1900s. Professor Chen called out Marcus Rodriguez, one of her graduate students. "You need to see this." Sarah made her way across the excavation site, stepping carefully around the grid of marked squares where her team was methodically uncovering and cataloging artifacts. The site was located in a small park that had been created when the original buildings were demolished for the subway expansion, just a few hundred yards from where the Brooklyn Bridge's massive stone towers rose into the sky. Marcus was kneeling beside a rectangular metal box that appeared to be made of tin, its surface green with patina, but remarkably well preserved. The box measured approximately 8 inches by 12 inches and was about 4 inches deep. What made it particularly intriguing was that it had been carefully wrapped in what appeared to be oiled cloth and placed inside a larger wooden container that had protected it from moisture and decay. "It was buried about 3 feet down," Marcus explained, "positioned directly beneath what our historical research suggests was the foundation of a photography studio that operated here from." Sarah knelt beside the box, her trained eye taking in the details of its construction and placement. The deliberate nature of the burial suggested that someone had intended for the contents to be preserved and possibly discovered at a later date. The location, so close to the Brooklyn Bridge, was also significant. The bridge had been completed in 1983 and was one of the most photographed landmarks in the city during the early 1900s. "Have you opened it?" she asked. "We were waiting for you," Marcus replied, "but we did take X-rays." They handed her a tablet, displaying the radiographic images. There appeared to be photographs, documents, and what looks like a small metal object inside. Sarah studied the X-ray images carefully. The photographs appeared to be glass plate negatives, the standard for professional photography in my. The documents looked like papers or letters, and the metal object was roughly cylindrical, about the size of a fountain pen. "Let's take this back to the lab," Sarah decided. "We need to open it under controlled conditions to preserve whatever's inside." 2 hours later, in the climate-controlled environment of Columbia's archaeology laboratory, Sarah and her team prepared to open the mysterious box. They had documented its exterior thoroughly, photographing it from every angle and taking measurements that would allow them to recreate its exact burial position. Dr. James Whitmore, the university's expert in photographic preservation, had joined them for the opening. James spent 20 years working with historical photographs and had developed techniques for preserving even the most fragile glass plate negatives. The oiled cloth wrapping suggests that whoever buried this understood the importance of moisture protection, James observed as they carefully removed the outer wrapping. That level of preservation awareness was unusual. Sarah used specialized tools to carefully lift the lid of the tin box. Inside, wrapped in what appeared to be silk cloth, were 4 glass plate negatives, a bundle of papers tied with string, and the cylindrical metal object they had seen in the X-ray. "Let's start with the photographs," James suggested. "Glass plates are the most fragile, and we need to assess their condition immediately." The first glass plate negative showed the Brooklyn Bridge from an unusual angle. photographed from what appeared to be the roof of a building near their excavation site. The image was remarkably clear and well composed, showing the bridge's Gothic arches and suspension cables in sharp detail. But as James examined the negative more closely under magnification, he noticed something that made him pause. "Sarah, look at this section of the image," he said, pointing to an area near the bridge's pedestrian walkway. Sarah leaned over the magnifying equipment and studied the area James had indicated. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just the typical pedestrians and horse-drawn vehicles that would have been common in. But as she adjusted the focus, she noticed a figure standing on the walkway who appeared to be wearing clothing that didn't quite fit the period. "That person's clothing looks modern," she said slowly. "The cut of the jacket, the style of the hat, it's not consistent with James nodded grimly. "And look at what they appear to be holding." Sarah adjusted the magnification again and felt her breath catch. A figure appeared to be holding a rectangular object up to their face, in a posture that was unmistakably that of someone taking a photograph. But the object was far too small, in the wrong shape, to be any camera technology that existed in it. "That looks like," Sarah began, then stopped herself, knowing how ridiculous her observation would sound. "Like a modern digital camera," James finished. "I know it sounds impossible, but that's exactly what it looks like." They examined the other 3 glass plates and found similar anomalies. Each photograph showed scenes from around the Brooklyn Bridge area in 1901, but each contained figures or objects that seemed anachronistic. One showed a person wearing what appeared to be modern athletic shoes. Another captured someone with what looked like earbuds or small headphones. "This has to be some kind of hoax," Marcos said, studying the images. "Maybe someone in 1901 was creating fake photographs for entertainment purposes, but the burial context suggests otherwise." Sarah replied, "This box was deliberately hidden and preserved. Someone wanted these photographs to survive and be discovered." She turned her attention to the bundle of papers, carefully untying the string that held them together. The papers appeared to be letters, written in a clear, educated hand on stationery, that bore the letterhead of Temporal Documentation Project, Brooklyn Division. Sarah read the first letter aloud. "To whoever discovers this case, the photographs contained herein document anomalous temporal incursions observed in the Brooklyn Bridge area during the autumn. These incursions appear to be individuals from future time periods who have somehow gained access to our era. Their purpose is unknown, but their presence suggests that our time period is of significant interest to future generations. We have documented these occurrences as thoroughly as possible, despite the risk to our professional reputations should these claims be dismissed as fantasy." The letter was signed Dr. Edmund Blackwood, Temporal Document. Sarah and Tim sat in a stunned silence as the implications of the letter sank in. They were looking at what appeared to be evidence of time travel documented by someone in 1901 who had observed people from the future visiting their time period. "This is either the most elaborate hoax in archaeological history," James said finally, "or we've stumbled upon something that will rewrite our understanding of history and physics." Sarah picked up the cylindrical metal object, which was surprisingly heavy for its size. As she examined it more closely, she noticed that it appeared to be made of materials that didn't look quite right for 1901 manufacturing. The surface had an almost crystalline quality, and there were markings etched into it that resembled no writing system she had ever seen. "Whatever this is," she said, "it's not from 1901. The materials, the manufacturing techniques, even the weight distribution, it's all wrong for that time period." Marcos leaned closer to examine the object. "Could it be some kind of recording device? Maybe left behind by one of these supposed time travelers?" "There's only one way to find out," Sarah replied. "We need to have this analyzed by experts in material science and possibly theoretical physics. And we need to verify the authenticity of these photographs, using every technique available." As they carefully repackaged the artifacts for further analysis, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they had uncovered something far more significant than a simple historical curiosity. The Brooklyn Bridge had been one of the undeniable marvels of its age, a symbol of human achievement and progress. If the documents were authentic, it had also been a destination for visitors from the future. The question was, what was so significant about Pion and the Brooklyn Bridge that it would attract temporal tourists? And what did their presence mean for understanding the nature of time and history? As Sarah locked the artifacts in the laboratory's secure storage, she realized that their archaeological excavation had become something much more complex and potentially dangerous. They weren't just uncovering the past, they might be uncovering evidence that the past and future were far more connected than anyone had ever imagined. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the laboratory to Whitmore already at work, examining the glass plate negatives under high-powered microscope equipment. He had spent the night running preliminary tests on the photographic materials, and his expression suggested that the results were as puzzling as the images themselves. "The glass plates are authentic to the period," James announced without looking up from his microscope. "The emulsion composition, the glass manufacturing techniques, even the chemical aging patterns, everything confirms that these were created using..." Sarah poured herself coffee from the laboratory's perpetually brewing pot and joined him at the examination station. But the images contain elements that shouldn't exist. "I've been analyzing the anachronistic figures pixel by pixel, and they show the same photographic characteristics as the rest of the image. Same lighting, same grain structures, same chemical composition. If this is a hoax, it's technically impossible using 1901 technology." Lisa Park, Colombia's leading expert in material science, entered the laboratory carrying a detailed analysis report. Sarah had asked her to examine the mysterious cylindrical object using every analytical technique available to modern science. "Your artifact is fascinating," Lisa announced, setting down her report. "The base material appears to be a titanium alloy that wasn't developed until the 1950s, but it contains trace elements that don't match any non-terrestrial composition." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "What kind of trace elements?" "Isotopic ratios that are inconsistent with Earth-based materials," Lisa explained. "It's as if the metals were formed under different stellar conditions, or processed using techniques that create isotopic signatures we don't recognize." Marcus, who had been examining the letter under ultraviolet light to check for modern inks or papers, looked up from his workstation. "The paper and ink are also authentic to Nantuleon. I've compared them to known samples from the period, and they match perfectly. Even the aging patterns are consistent with documents that are over 10 to 20 years old." Sarah studied the materials analysis report, trying to process the implications of what they were discovering. Every test confirmed the authenticity of the 1901 context, but the content of the photographs and the composition of the metal object suggested technologies and materials that didn't exist in. Robert Steinberg, at the Smithsonian. He specializes in historical anomalies and has security clearance for unusual discoveries. James looked up from his microscope. "Security clearance? There are protocols for archaeological discoveries that might have national security implications," Sarah explained. "If we're dealing with evidence of advanced technology or temporal phenomena, the government has procedures for handling such discoveries." Lisa opened her laptop and displayed a three-dimensional model of the cylindrical object's internal structure. "There's something else you should know. The object appears to have internal components that are far more complex than its external appearance suggests. It's almost like a technological device, disguised to look like a simple metal cylinder." "What kind of device?" Marcus asked. "I'm not sure, but the internal structure suggests it might be some kind of data storage or communication device. The crystalline components could potentially hold enormous amounts of information." Sarah made the decision to contact Dr. Steinberg immediately. Within 3 hours, he had arrived at Colombia, accompanied by 2 individuals who introduced themselves only as federal agents, specializing in unusual archaeological discoveries. Steinberg was a tall, distinguished man in his 60s, with the bearing of someone accustomed to dealing with extraordinary situations. He examined their findings with the methodical thoroughness of someone who had encountered similar mysteries before. This is not the first time we've encountered evidence of temporal anomalies in historical contexts, he said, after reviewing the documentation, but it is the most comprehensive and well-documented case we've seen. One of the federal agents, a woman who identified herself only as Agent Morrison, studied the photographs with particular interest. The figures in these images match descriptions from other temporal anomaly reports we've investigated. Semi-anachronistic clothing patterns, same behavioral characteristics. Other reports? Sarah asked. How many cases like this have you encountered? More than you might expect, Dr. Steinberg replied. But most lack the documentary evidence and preservation quality of your discovery. The temporal documentation project mentioned in these letters appears to have been a systematic effort to record temporal incursions. Agent Morrison activated a tablet computer and showed them a series of photographs from various historical periods. We've documented similar anomalies in photographs from the Civil War, the construction of the Panama Canal, and the 1926 San Francisco earthquake. Always the same pattern, figures from apparently different time periods, observing significant historical events. James leaned forward to examine the images. Are you suggesting that time travel is real and that people from the future are visiting historical periods? We're suggesting that the evidence points to phenomena that challenge our current understanding of temporal mechanics. Dr. Steinberg replied carefully. Whether that constitutes time travel in the science fiction sense is still being determined. The second federal agent, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. Chen, we need to examine the cylindrical object using specialized equipment that isn't available in university laboratories. Would you be willing to cooperate with a more extensive investigation? Sarah looked at her team, seeing the mixture of excitement and apprehension in their faces. They had uncovered something extraordinary, but accepting federal involvement would mean losing control of their discovery. What kind of investigation, she asked. We have facilities that can analyze the internal components of the device without damaging it. Agent Morrison explained. We also have experts in temporal phenomena who might be able to determine its purpose and origin. Dr. Steinberg added, Sarah, this discovery is too significant to be handled by a single university team. The implications for our understanding of history and physics are enormous, but I can guarantee that your team will remain involved in the investigation and that your academic interest will be protected. Marcus whispered to Sarah, if we don't cooperate, they'll probably just classify the whole discovery and we'll never see it again. Sarah nodded, understanding the reality of their situation. We'll cooperate, but I want assurances that our findings will eventually be published and that the scientific community will have access to this information. That will depend on what we discover, Agent Morrison replied. But I can promise you that truth and scientific advancement are our primary goals. As they prepared to transfer the artifacts to the federal facility, Sarah couldn't help but feel that they were crossing a threshold from which there would be no return. The simple archaeological excavation had become something far more complex and potentially world-changing. Lisa approached her with a final observation. Sarah, I ran one more test on the metal object. It's emitting a very faint electromagnetic signal, almost below the threshold of detection. Whatever it is, it's still active. After more than 10 to they weren't just dealing with historical artifacts, they were dealing with technology that might still be functional and potentially dangerous. As the federal agents carefully packaged the artifacts for transport, Sarah realized that their discovery had implications that extended far beyond archaeology or even science. If the evidence was authentic, it suggested that history itself might be far more complex and interconnected than anyone had ever imagined. The Brooklyn Bridge, standing majestically in the distance, had witnessed more than just the passage of time. It had apparently been a destination for visitors from the future who had left behind evidence of their presence. The question now was whether humanity was ready to understand what that evidence meant for the nature of time, history, and reality itself. The federal facility was located in a nondescript building in Queens, its exterior giving no indication of the advanced technology housed within. Sarah and her team were escorted through multiple security checkpoints, their phones and personal electronics confiscated, before being led to a laboratory that looked like something from a science fiction film. Elizabeth Warren, the facility's director, was a theoretical physicist who had spent 15 years studying temporal anomalies for various government agencies. She greeted Sarah's team with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting years for evidence as compelling as what they had discovered. The Brooklyn Bridge cache is the most significant temporal artifact we've encountered, Dr. Warren explained, as she led them through the facility. The combination of photographic evidence, contemporary documentation, and physical artifacts provides a level of authentication that we've never achieved before. The laboratory where they brought the cylindrical device was filled with equipment that Sarah didn't recognize. Masipa computers homemade quietly, while displays showed complex mathematical equations and three-dimensional models that seemed to shift and change as she watched. We've developed techniques for analyzing potentially temporal artifacts without damaging them, Dr. Warren continued. The challenge is that we're dealing with technology that may operate according to physical principles we don't fully understand. Agent Morrison activated a large display screen that showed the internal structure of the cylindrical device in extraordinary detail. Our scans reveal that the device contains what appears to be a quantum storage matrix surrounded by temporal stabilization components. Sarah studied the display, trying to understand what she was seeing. Quantum storage matrix, a theoretical technology for storing information at the quantum level, Dr. Warren explained. If such technology existed, it could hold virtually unlimited amounts of data in a very small space. But the temporal stabilization components are what make this truly extraordinary. James leaned forward to examine the display more closely. What do temporal stabilization components do? They would theoretically allow the device to maintain quantum coherence across different time periods, Dr. Warren replied. In other words, this device might be designed to function regardless of when it exists in the timeline. Marcus whistled softly. So it's a time-proof storage device? That's our working hypothesis, Agent Morrison confirmed. But we need to access the stored information to understand its true purpose. Dr. Warren led them to another section of the laboratory where the glass plate negatives were being analyzed, using techniques that went far beyond traditional photographic examination. We've been studying the temporal signatures in the photographs, she explained. Every object in a photograph, she explained, every object in a photograph carries subtle electromagnetic traces that can reveal information about its temporal origin. The results displayed on the monitors were startling. While most elements in the photograph showed temporal signatures consistent with Dantus interval, the anachronistic figures showed signatures that suggested they originated from various points in the future. This figure, Warren said, pointing to the person with the camera-like device, shows temporal signatures consistent with the technology from approximately the end. This one, she indicated another anomalous figure, appears to be from a... Sarah felt her understanding of reality shifting as she processed this information. You're saying these photographs actually captured people from different future time periods? The evidence strongly suggests that interpretation, Dr. Warren repeated. But what's even more interesting is the pattern of their visits. They all appear to be observing the same historical period, the early 19th centuries, around the Brooklyn Bridge. Agent Morrison brought up a new display showing a timeline with multiple markers. We've identified 17 different temporal signatures in the photographs, representing visitors from various points between Tudor. They're all observing events in 1901. Why 1901? Marcus asked. What was so significant about that year? Dr. Warren consulted her notes. 1901 was a pivotal year in American history. President McKinley was assassinated. Theodore Roosevelt became president, and several technological and social developments occurred that shaped the 20th century. But there might be something more specific about the Brooklyn Bridge area. She activated another display showing historical records from 1901. According to our research, there were several unusual incidents reported in the Brooklyn Bridge area during that year. Witnesses reported seeing people in strange clothing, unexplained lights, and technology that didn't match the period. Sarah studied the historical reports, many of which had been dismissed as hoaxes or misidentifications at the time. The Temporal Documentation Project mentioned in the letters they were investigating these incidents. Dr. Edmund Blackwood appears to have been a legitimate scientist who became convinced that temporal incursions were occurring. Agent Morrison confirmed he documented his observations systematically, but his work was largely ignored by the scientific community of his time. Dr. Warren led them to the most secure section of the laboratory where the cylindrical device was being prepared for data extraction. We're going to attempt to access the information stored in the device. But I need to warn you that this process might activate systems we don't understand. The device was placed in a containment field that would prevent any potentially dangerous emissions while allowing them to interface with its quantum storage matrix. As the extraction process began, displays around the laboratory showed streams of data that appeared to be far more complex than any information storage system from 19. It appears to be a combination of text files, images, and what looks like video recordings. The first file that appeared on the main display was a document titled Temporal Observation Protocol, Brooklyn Bridge. The text was in English, but the formatting and terminology suggested it had been created using technology far more advanced than anything from Sarah read the document aloud. Temporal Observation Mission National de Decades. Objective is to monitor and document the convergence event scheduled for October 9. Timeline variations have been identified, and observation is necessary to ensure optimal historical. Observer teams from various temporal origins have been assigned to document all aspects of the convergence. Convergence event? James asked. What kind of convergence? Dr. Warren studied the document intently. It sounds like they're describing a point in time where multiple possible futures intersect. A moment when small changes could lead to dramatically different historical outcomes. More files appeared on the display, including what appeared to be mission reports from different temporal observation teams. Each report described the same time period from slightly different perspectives, but all focused on events around the Brooklyn. Look at this, Marcus said, pointing to one of the reports. They're not just observing, they're making small adjustments to ensure specific outcomes. The report he had highlighted described subtle interventions, preventing a carriage accident that would have delayed a crucial meeting, ensuring that a particular newspaper article was published on a schedule, and influencing the decisions of key historical figures through carefully orchestrated encounters. Agent Morrison leaned forward. They're manipulating history to ensure specific outcomes. But whose outcome? Who's directing these temporal observation missions? Dr. Warren activated another display showing video files that had been extracted from the device. The first video showed the Brooklyn Bridge from an elevated perspective, but the image quality and color saturation were far superior to any recording technology that existed in men. This was recorded using technology that wouldn't be invented for decades. But is documenting events from 1900. As they watched the video, they could see figures moving around the bridge area, who appeared to be the same anachronistic individuals captured in the glass very negative. But now they could observe their behavior in real time, and it was clear that they were conducting systematic surveillance of the area. They're coordinating their activities, Sarah observed. This isn't random time tourism, it's an organized operation. The final file that appeared on the display was a message addressed specifically to whoever might discover the device. Sarah felt a chill as she read the opening lines: to the archaeologists of the early 21st century who have discovered this cache. Your discovery is not accidental. The placement of this device and the documentation it contains were carefully planned to be found at this specific time by individuals with the expertise to understand its significance. You have been chosen to play a crucial role in ensuring the stability of the timeline. The message continued with instructions for contacting the temporal observation teams and warnings about the consequences of revealing the information to the general public without proper preparation. As the implications of the message sank in, Sarah realized that the archaeological discovery had been orchestrated by forces from the future. They hadn't stumbled upon evidence of time travel. They had been deliberately recruited into a temporal operation that spanned more than a century. The question now was whether they were prepared to accept the responsibility that came with this knowledge, and whether humanity was ready to learn that its history had been guided by visitors from its own future. I want to know how far this message is reaching. Comment below and tell me which city or country you're watching from. The complete message from the temporal device filled multiple screens in the Federal Facility's main analysis room. As Sarah and her team read through the detailed instructions and explanations, the scope of what they had discovered became increasingly overwhelming. Warren projected the key sections of the message onto the main display for everyone to review. The Temporal Observation Project was initiated in the year 2100, following the discovery that historical timelines are far more fragile than previously understood. Small changes in key historical moments can create cascade effects that fundamentally alter the development of human civilization. The Brooklyn Bridge convergence of 1901 represents one of the most critical junctures in American history, with implications that extend far into the future. Your discovery of this cache in 2024 occurs at another critical juncture. The decisions made by your generation regarding artificial intelligence, climate change, and global cooperation will determine whether humanity develops the technology necessary for temporal observation or faces civilizational collapse before achieving temporal capabilities. The temporal observation teams you have documented were not merely studying history. They were ensuring that specific events occur in ways that would lead to the development of temporal. Without their interventions, the timeline would have diverged in directions that prevented humanity from ever achieving temporal capabilities, creating a paradox that would have erased the observation project from existence. Agent Morrison paused the display. They're describing a temporal paradox. The future depends on interventions that can only be made if the future already exists to make them. James studied the message intently. It's a bootstrap paradox. The Temporal Observation Project exists because it ensured its own existence by manipulating the past. Dr. Warren nodded grimly. But there's more. The message indicates that our discovery of this information is itself part of the temporal plan. We're not just learning about temporal observation, we're being recruited to participate in it. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. What exactly are they asking us to do? Warren scrolled to the next section of the message. The archaeological team that discovers this cache has been selected based on their expertise, integrity, and position within the academic and government communities. Your role is to serve as a bridge between the Temporal Observation Project and your contemporary society. Over the next several years, you will receive additional communications and instructions that will guide humanity toward the development of temporal technology while avoiding the catastrophic timeline variations that could destroy civilization. The first phase of your involvement requires the establishment of a temporal research foundations that will appear to be conducting theoretical research into time travel while actually preparing for eventual contact with temporal observation teams. This foundation must be created with the full knowledge and cooperation of your government, but its true purpose must remain classified until humanity is prepared for the revelation that its history has been guided by its own future. Marcus looked up from his copy of the message. They want us to create a fake research foundation that's actually a real research foundation. They want us to prepare humanity for the truth, gradually Sarah replied, rather than revealing everything at once, which could cause social and political chaos. Agent Morrison activated her secure communication device. I need to brief the National Security Council immediately. The implications of this message extend far beyond archaeological or scientific concerns. Wherein continued reading from the message, the Temporal Observation Project has identified several critical decision points in your immediate future that will determine whether your timeline develops along the optimal trajectory. These decision points involve technological developments, political decisions, and social changes that must occur in specific ways to ensure timeline stability. Your role as temporal liaisons will involve subtle influence of these decision points. You will not be asked to manipulate events directly, but rather to ensure that key individuals have access to information and perspectives that will guide them toward optimal decisions. This influence must appear to arise naturally from academic research and scientific discovery. Sarah felt a chill as she realized the implications. They're asking us to manipulate our own timeline, to ensure it develops in ways that support their existence. But if we don't, James pointed out, the timeline could diverge in ways that prevent temporal technology from ever being developed, which could erase the entire temporal observation project and leave history unprotected from catastrophic changes. Warren brought up a new section of the message that contained specific instructions. Phase 1. Establish the Temporal Research Foundation with government support and funding. Recruit additional team members with expertise in physics, history, and social psychology. Begin theoretical research into temporal mechanics, while preparing for eventual practical applications. Phase 2. Identify and monitor the critical decision points in your timeline. Use your academic and government connections to ensure that key individuals have access to information that will guide them toward optimal choices. Phase 3. Prepare for direct contact with temporal observation team. This contact will occur when your timeline has developed sufficient stability to handle the revelation of temporal intervention without causing paradoxes or social collapse. Agent Morrison finished her secure call and returned to the group. The President has authorized the creation of the Temporal Research Foundation under the highest classification levels. We have unlimited funding and authority to recruit whatever expertise we need. Sarah looked around at her team, seeing the mixture of excitement and apprehension in their faces. Are we really prepared to take on this responsibility? We're talking about guiding the development of human civilization based on instructions from the future. Dr. Warren pulled up a final section of the message. We understand the magnitude of the responsibility we are placing upon you. The knowledge that history has been guided by temporal intervention is both empowering and terrifying. But consider the alternative. Without temporal observation and guidance, humanity faces multiple potential futures, involving environmental collapse, technological disasters, and social breakdown that could end human civilization within the next century. The Temporal Observation Project represents humanity's attempt to guide itself toward a future where these catastrophes are avoided, and where human civilization develops the wisdom and technology necessary to explore the universe and ensure its own long-term survival.
Your participation in this project is voluntary, but the consequences of refusing extend far beyond your individual lives.
The laboratory fell silent as everyone processed the weight of what they were being asked to undertake. They were being invited to become part of a temporal conspiracy that spanned centuries with the goal of ensuring humanity's survival and development. Marcus was the first to speak. If this is real, if we're really dealing with communications from the future, then we have a moral obligation to participate. The alternative is potentially allowing human civilization to collapse. James nodded slowly. But we also have an obligation to verify that these communications are authentic and that the future they're trying to create is actually beneficial for humanity. Sarah studied the displays showing the temporal analysis of the artifacts they had discovered. Every test confirmed the authenticity of the materials and the impossibility of creating such evidence using contemporary technology. The evidence suggests that this is real, she said finally. The question is whether we trust the motivations of the Temporal Observation Project. Are they really trying to save humanity, or are they manipulating history for their own purposes? Dr. Warren activated a new display showing additional files from the temporal device. There's more information here that might help answer that question. Technical specifications for temporal technology, historical analysis of timeline variations, and detailed projections of potential futures. As they began to examine the additional information, Sarah realized that they were crossing a threshold from which there would be no return. They were no longer just archaeologists and scientists studying an interesting discovery. They were becoming active participants in a temporal project that could determine the future of human civilization. The Brooklyn Bridge, visible through the laboratory's windows, stood as a symbol of human achievement and progress. Now they understood that it had also been a focal point for humanity's first contact with its own future, and they were being asked to continue that contact in ways that could reshape the world. The question was whether they were prepared for the responsibility of guiding humanity's destiny based on knowledge from a future that might not exist without their intervention. Chapter 5. Building the foundation. 3 months after the discovery of the temporal cache, Sarah found herself in a conference room in a newly constructed facility in upstate New York. The Temporal Research Foundation had been established with remarkable speed, funded through classified government channels, and staffed with some of the world's leading experts in physics, history, and social psychology. The facility itself was a marvel of modern architecture and technology, designed to appear as a conventional research institute while housing equipment and capabilities that were decades ahead of publicly available technology. Much of the advanced equipment had been developed based on technical specifications found in the temporal device, allowing them to begin practical research into temporal mechanics. Michael Chen, no relation to Sarah, a theoretical physicist from MIT, was presenting his analysis of the temporal technology specifications to the assembled team. The mathematics are incredibly sophisticated, he explained, displaying complex equations on the room's holographic projectors. But they're based on extensions of quantum mechanics and relativity theory that we're only beginning to understand. Sarah looked around the conference table at the team they had assembled. In addition to her original archaeological team, Warren's federal researchers, they had recruited experts from around the world. Dr. Yuki Tanaka from Tokyo University was their leading expert on quantum consciousness. Dr. Ahmed Hassan from Cambridge specialized in temporal paradox theory. Maria Santos from São Paulo was a social psychologist who studied the effects of technological revelation on human societies. The key insight, Dr. Chen continued, is that temporal observation doesn't require physical time travel. Instead, it involves projecting quantum consciousness across temporal dimensions while maintaining connection to the observer's original time period. James raised his hand. How does that explain the physical artifacts we found? The photographs clearly show physical beings from different time periods. The temporal observation teams appear to use a hybrid approach. Dr. Warren explained, quantum consciousness projection for observation and communication, combined with limited physical manifestation for direct intervention when necessary. Dr. Tanaka activated her own present. My analysis of the consciousness projection technology suggests that it requires a level of quantum coherence in human consciousness that most people don't naturally possess. The temporal observers have likely undergone significant enhancement to develop these capabilities. Sarah studied the technical specifications, trying to understand the implications of what they were learning. Are we talking about enhanced humans from the future, or have they developed technology that allows anyone to project consciousness across time? Both, apparently, Dr. Hassan replied. The specifications describe a gradual enhancement process that begins with technological assistance and eventually leads to permanent consciousness modification. The temporal observers are essentially evolved humans with capabilities we can barely imagine. Agent Morrison, who had become their primary liaison with the government, brought up a new concern. We've been monitoring global communications for any signs that other countries have discovered similar temporal artifacts or developed temporal research programs. So far, we haven't detected any evidence of competing temporal projects. Dr. Santos leaned forward. That raises an important question about the ethics of what we're doing. If we're the only ones with access to temporal technology and guidance from the future, we're essentially making decisions that will affect all of humanity without their knowledge or consent. Sarah had been struggling with the same ethical concern. The temporal observers addressed this in their communications. They argue that revealing temporal intervention too early could cause social collapse or lead to the technology being misused by groups with harmful intentions. But who gave them the right to make that decision? Dr. Santos pressed. And who gives us the right to continue making it? Dr. Warren activated a display showing projections of potential timeline variations. According to the temporal analysis, revealing temporal technology prematurely leads to catastrophic outcomes in 73% of the projected timelines. The variations include temporal wars, timeline fragmentation, and paradoxes that could erase human civilization entirely. Marcus, who had been studying the historical intervention records, spoke up. I've been analyzing the pattern of temporal interventions over the past century. They're remarkably subtle and focused on preventing catastrophic outcomes rather than controlling human development. The temporal observers seem to be trying to preserve human free will while preventing civilization-ending disasters. Dr. Chen brought up a new set of technical specifications. We've made significant progress in developing our own temporal observation capabilities. The prototype consciousness projection system should be ready for testing within 6 months. Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension at the prospect of actually communicating with the temporal observers. What kind of testing are we talking about? Initially, we'll attempt to project consciousness backward in time to observe historical events we can verify. Dr. Warren explained. This will allow us to test the technology safely while confirming the accuracy of the temporal observation records. Dr. Hassan raised the concern. Backward temporal observation carries the risk of creating paradoxes if the observer inadvertently influences past events. We need extensive safety protocols. The temporal observers provided detailed safety guidelines. Agent Brosnan confirmed. They've apparently spent decades developing protocols for safe temporal observation. As the meeting progressed, Sarah realized that they were rapidly approaching the point where theoretical research would become practical application. The Temporal Research Foundation was no longer just studying temporal technology. They were preparing to use it. Tanaka presented the next phase of their development timeline. Based on the technical specifications and our current progress, we should be able to establish direct communication with the temporal observers within 12 months. This will allow us to receive real-time guidance on critical decision points in our timeline. Sarah looked around the table at a team of brilliant scientists and researchers who had committed themselves to this extraordinary project. Are we all comfortable with the direction this is heading? Once we establish direct communication with the future, there's no going back to ignorance. Dr. Santos nodded slowly. I've been studying the social psychology of technological revelation, and I believe we're taking the right approach. Gradual introduction of temporal concepts through theoretical research will prepare society for eventual revelation. Will causing panic or social breakdown. Marcus pulled up historical records on his tablet. I've been researching Edmund Blackwood, the scientist who documented the original temporal observances They ultimately decided that the knowledge was too important to suppress, even if it challenged conventional understanding of reality. Dr. Warren activated a secure communication system. We've received another message from the Temporal Observer. They're requesting a status update on our progress and providing guidance for the next phase of our development. The new message appeared on the main display. Temporal Resource Foundation team, your progress exceeds our projections for this phase of timeline development. The establishment of your research capabilities and the recruitment of qualified personnel positions humanity well for the challenges ahead. We are now prepared to provide more specific guidance regarding the critical decision points in your immediate future. The next 18 months will include several moments where small changes could have enormous consequences for timeline stability. Your role in influencing these decision points will be crucial for ensuring optimal outcomes. Prepare for direct communication protocols. The quantum consciousness projection system you are developing will allow real-time consultation during critical moments. This capability will be essential for navigating the complex challenges your civilization faces in the coming years. As Sarah read the message, she realized that their role was evolving from passive recipients of temporal guidance to active participants in shaping humanity's future. The weight of that responsibility was both thrilling and terrifying. The Brooklyn Bridge discovery had led them far beyond archaeology into a realm where science, ethics, and the fate of human civilization intersected in ways they were only beginning to understand. And they were about to take the next step into that unknown territory. The quantum consciousness projection chamber was a marvel of technology that seemed to blend science fiction with cutting-edge physics. Located in the most secure section of the Temporal Research Foundation facility, the chamber resembled a sophisticated medical imaging device combined with quantum computing equipment that hummed with barely contained energy. Chen made final adjustments to the projection parameters while Sarah prepared for humanity's first intentional communication with the temporal observers. She lay on the projection platform, wearing a neural interface headset that would allow her consciousness to be projected across temporal dimensions while maintaining connection to her physical body. Warren said through the intercom, "This is primarily a test of our communication capabilities. Don't attempt to gather extensive information on your first projection. Focus on establishing stable contact and confirming the authenticity of the temporal observers." Sarah nodded, trying to calm her racing heart. After months of preparation and testing, they were finally ready to make direct contact with the future. The implications of success were staggering. They would be the first humans in history to intentionally communicate across time. Tanaka monitors the quantum coherence readings from her control station. Consciousness projection field is stable. Neural interface is showing optimal synchronization. We're ready to initiate temporal projection. Beginning projection sequence, Dr. Chen announced. Target temporal coordinates, October 15, 1922 in Brooklyn Bridge area. Duration, 15 minutes maximum. Sarah felt a strange sensation as the projection field activated, as if her consciousness was being gently separated from her physical body. The laboratory around, it began to fade, replaced by a swirling vortex of light and energy that seemed to stretch across impassable distances. Gradually, the vortex resolved into a familiar scene, the Brooklyn Bridge. But Sarah's perspective was different from anything she had experienced before. She could observe the scene from multiple angles simultaneously, and she was aware of temporal currents and energy patterns that were invisible to normal perception. Near the bridge's pedestrian walkway, she detected the presence she had been seeking, one of the temporal observers. The figure appeared as a complex pattern of consciousness and energy rather than a simple physical form, and Sarah realized that she was perceiving the observer's true nature rather than the disguised appearance captured in the historical photograph. Contact established, she reported through the neural interface, her voice reaching the laboratory across more than a century. "I can perceive a temporal observer near the bridge." Attempting communication. The observer seemed to become aware of her presence and turned toward her with what felt like surprise and recognition. Communication occurred not through words, but through direct transfer of thoughts and concepts. Welcome, Dr. Chen. We have been expecting this contact. Your development of consciousness projection capabilities confirms that your timeline is progressing optimally. Sarah felt a flood of information and emotion from the observer, relief, satisfaction, and something that felt like parental pride. You are from the Temporal Observation Project of 200-107. I am Observer Designation Temporal 7, assigned to monitor the 501 convergence point. My primary temporal origin is 227, but I have been conducting observations across multiple time periods for what you would measure as several decades. The concept of spending decades observing different historical periods was difficult for Sarah to comprehend. How many observers are involved in this project? The Temporal Observing Project involves approximately 200 consciousness and ancient individuals monitoring critical junctures across human history. We focus primarily on the period from 1000 to 200,000, as this represents the most unstable phase of human development. Sarah became aware of other temporal observers in the area, their consciousness patterns creating a complex web of observers and communication that spanned the Brooklyn Bridge vicinity. What makes this location so significant? The Brooklyn Bridge represents a convergence of technological, social, and economic forces that shaped the trajectory of American development. Small changes in events that occurred here in 1991 could have prevented the technological and social developments necessary for temporal observation capabilities to emerge in our timeline. Through the neural interface, Sarah could sense her team monitoring her vital signs and consciousness coherence from the sensation of existing in two time periods simultaneously was disorienting but manageable. What can you tell me about the critical decision points in our immediate future? Observer Temporal 7 transmitted a complex pattern of information that Sarah's enhanced consciousness interpreted as a multidimensional timeline map. Her timeline faces three primary convergence points in the next 18 months. The first involves artificial intelligence development protocols that will determine whether AI becomes a tool for human enhancement or a threat to human survival. The second concerns international cooperation on climate change mitigation. The third relates to space exploration initiatives that will determine whether humanity becomes a multiplanetary species. The information was overwhelming in its complexity and implication. Sarah could see how seemingly related decisions and events were connected in ways that would determine the future of human civilization. How can we influence these decision points without creating paradoxes or unintended consequences? Your role is to ensure that key decision makers have access to information and perspectives that will guide them toward optimal choices. This influence must appear to arise naturally from academic research and scientific discovery. Direct revelation of temporal intervention would create paradoxes that could destabilize the timeline. Sarah became aware that her projection time was approaching its limit. The connection between her consciousness and her physical body in 2024 was beginning to strain. Will we have ongoing communication with the Temporal Observation Project? Yes. As your consciousness projection capabilities develop, we will provide regular guidance and consultation. You are now part of the Temporal Observation Network, with responsibility for monitoring and influencing your own time period. The observer transmitted a final burst of information, technical specifications for improving their projection system, detailed analysis of the upcoming decision points, and protocols for ongoing communication with the temporal network. Remember, Dr. Chen, the future is not predetermined. Every choice creates new possibilities. Your timeline has the potential to develop in ways that exceed even our projections. Guide wisely. With that, the connection began to fade, and Sarah felt her consciousness being drawn back across time to her physical body. In the laboratory materialized around her as the projection field powered down. Contacted successful, she reported, her voice hoarse from the strain of temporal projection. I have extensive information about the temporal observation project and our role in upcoming critical decisions. Warren helped her set up as the neural interface was removed. How do you feel? Any disorientación o temporal displacement effect? Sarah took a momento to assess her condition. I feel expanded, as if my consciousness has been stretched across time and is slowly contracting back to normal dimensions, but I'm coherent and the information transfer was successful. Dr. Chen studied the readouts from the projection system. Quantum coherence remained stable throughout the projection. Neural activity showed patterns we've never recorded before, as if your brain was processing information for multiple temporal dimensions simultaneously. Marcus leaned forward eagerly. What did you learn about the temporal observers? Sarah spent the next hour debriefing her team on the contact with Observer Temporal 7, sharing the information about the temporal observation network and the critical decision points facing their timeline. As the complex web of causation connecting seemingly unrelated events, she could feel the weight of responsibility hanging on her colleagues' faces. So we're no longer just studying temporal phenomena, Dr. Santos observed. We're now part of a temporal network with responsibility for guiding human civilization, and the decisions we help influence in the quienes estudiamos will determine whether humanity develops the capabilities necessary for temporal observation. El fixes civilizational collapse James added. Agente Morrison activated a secure communication system. I need to brief the President immediately. The information humanity contact will require policy decisions at the highest levels of government. As the team prepared to analyze y act on the información tan temporal contact, Sarah realized on the Archaeologists several que archaeoperative active que timpanani the most important project, ensuring to survival and development across time. The ensuring survival and development across time. Tibia humante no level inicials un tobatursu, where ikitioku peparsa on the Tudors, and master the mysteries of time itself. The question now was whether they were wise enough to use this knowledge responsibly. 6 months after first contact with the temporal observers, Sarah found herself in the Oval Office, briefing the President of the United States on the most classified information in human history. The weight of the moment was not lost on her. She was explaining to the leader of the free world that history had been guided by visitors from the future, and the critical decisions in the coming months would determine the fate of human civilization. President Catherine Walsh listened intently as Sarah presented the timeline analysis provided by the temporal observers. The president was a former physicist who transitioned to politics, making her uniquely qualified to understand both the scientific and policy implications of temporal intervention. Dr. Chen, the president said after reviewing the briefing materials, "You're telling me that artificial intelligence development, climate policy, and space exploration are all connected in ways that will determine whether humanity survives the next century?" According to the temporal analysis, yes, Sarah replied. Small changes in how we approach these challenges could create cascade effects que either lead to unprecedented human prosperity or civilizational collapse. Dr. Warren activated a holographic display showing the complex web of causation, connecting the 3 critical decision points. The temporal observers have identified specific moments where policy decisions and technological developments will have far-reaching consequences. The president studied the display intently. That kind of Morrison consulted her briefing notes. In 3 weeks, Congress will vote on the AI Safety and Development Act. The specific language of this legislation will determine whether artificial intelligence development proceeds with adequate safety protocols or rushes ahead without proper safeguards. Sarah continues 6 weeks from now. The International Climate Cooperation Summit will establish frameworks for global response to climate change. The level of cooperation achieved at this summit will determine whether humanity can prevent catastrophic environmental collapse. And in 4 months, Dr. Warren added, NASA will make budget allocation decisions that will either accelerate space exploration capabilities or delay them by decades. According to the temporal analysis, becoming a multiplanetary species within the next 30 years is crucial for long-term human survival. President Walsh leaned back in her chair, processing the enormous implications of what she was hearing. And our role is to influence these decisions without revealing that we have guidance from the future? Exactly, Sarah confirmed. The temporal observers Having maro clear-cut direct revelation of temporal intervention han pantelajo creato paradoxes que destabilize the timeline. Y can del temporo communication paradoxes que destabilize the timeline. The president activated her secure communication system. Y calling an emergency meeting of the National Security Council. We need to develop strategies for influencing these decision points while maintaining the appearance of normal policy development. Over the following weeks, Temporal Research Foundation worked closely with government agencies to implement social influence strategies. Dr. Santos led a team of social psychologists in developing messaging frameworks that could guide public opinion towards supporting optimal policy choices. Dr. Chen provided technical analysis that supported specific approaches to AI safety legislation. Marcus and Holmes prepared statistical analysis que demonstrated the importance of international cooperation in space exploration for long-term human survival. The AI Safety and Development Act, both, was the most critical test of their influence capabilities. Through carefully orchestrated academic conferences, policy briefings, and media appearances, the Foundation team provided information and perspectives that highlighted the importance of safety protocols in AI development. Sarah watched the Congressional Voter Foundation Situation Room, surrounded by monitors showing real-time analysis of the decision's potential consequences. As the final votes were tallied, she felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The legislation had passed with the safety provisions intact, but the margin had been uncomfortably narrow. Temporal analysis confirms optimal outcome, Dr. Warren announced, reading data for a quantum projection system. The AI safety protocols established official legislation by mapping several catastrophic timeline variation involving artificial intelligence. So those, y completo terraform communicating involving artificial intelligence. So those, completo calls legal mechanism become tennis economists is commissioned on policy experts to develop compelling arguments for unprecedented levels of international cooperation. Dr. Tanaka used consultas predicciones, consulta temporal observeros a versus specific negotiation strategies, que guiar optimal outcomes, que es assumptit conflicti da poder mullos y volons per conflicti da global needs. Pero the information or perspectives provided by the Foundation team helped negotiations understand the long-term consequences of their decisions in ways that transcended short-term political considerations. One final climate agreement and agreement stars felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The level of international cooperation achieved exceeded most experts' expectations and established frameworks that could prevent the most catastrophic climate scenarios identified by the temporal observers. Tosto da porcheti, va de masos te viantura complista de turno da podero de mafot in temporal observers. The NASA budget allocation decision proved to be the most challenging of the three critical decision points. Space exploration lacked the immediate urgency or AI safety or climate change, making it difficult to generate public and political support to banding Karsendak. Dr. Chen comput aerospace engineers and planetary sciences to develop compelling arguments for accelerated space exploration. Marcus prepared historical analysis showing how space exploration had driven technological development and international cooperation throughout human history. Dr. Chen bugiu majantis komaliens, obkramocha thoastau, ravde como laftau, Dr. Chen bualastau, pok awel retodas de plopo for puples de Fernando. Santos led public opinion research, donde identify de mestos efectivamente obtuetaratius por varios of efectivos exploración. Pero despite the missiles effortu, budget allocation process remained uncertain until the final decision meeting. Sarah used consultas projection or consult with temporal observers about last-minute influence strategies, receiving guidance on specific arguments and information that could tip a decision toward optimal outcomes. The final NASA budget allocation exceeded the Foundation's most optimistic projections, providing the final NASA budget allocation exceeded the Foundation's most optimistic projections, providing the further accelerated Mars exploration, asteroid mining research, and the development of permanent space habitats. The decision would position humanity to become a multiplanetary species within the time frame identified as critical by the temporal observers. As Sarah reviewed the outcomes of all three critical decision points, exemplified the profound sense of accomplishment mixed with the sobering realization of the responsibility they had undertaken. through subtle influence and carefully orchestrated information and sharing, the Arondo guide humanity toward a future the temporal observers had identified as optimal for long-term survival and development. Dr. Warren activated the Quantum Projection System para schedule consultation with the Temporal Observation Network, Observer Temporal 7, Todos esto Temporal Research Foundation, reporting on the completion of Phase 1 critical decisions. The response came through the Consciousness Projection Interface, where felt like satisfaction and relief. Temporal Research Foundation, your influence on the critical decision points has exceeded our projections. The AI safety protocols, climate cooperation frameworks, and space exploration acceleration have positioned your timeline for optimal development. The probability of catastrophic timeline variations has decreased from 73%, thus set a fellow wave of relief at the confirmation that several efforts had been successful. What are our next objectives? Phase 2 involves preparation for broader temporal network integration. Your timeline is now stable enough to handle revelation of temporal intervention to selected individuals in key positions. You will need to expand your influence network while maintaining operational security. Dr. Chen leaned forward. How do we determine which individuals are ready for this knowledge? We will provide psychological profiles and readiness assessments for potential recruits. The expansion must be gradual and carefully managed to prevent information leaks that could destabilize public understanding of reality. Agent Morrison consulted a secure tablet. We've already identified several candidates in government, academia, and industry who have the security clearances and psychological profiles necessary for these knowledges. Correct. The next phase will also involve development of more advanced temporal technologies. Your consciousness projection capabilities are approaching the level necessary for limited and temporal intervention, rather than observation implication. The temporal intervention capabilities sent a chill through the situation room. Sarah realized they were approaching the point where they would have the power to directly influence historical events rather than contemporary decisions. What kind of temporal interventions? Santos asked, el refresno colistante consult todos ya bien el timeline. Tiongero el tubiante me sento prevencibil acceso al collapse, pues le fastidios en te collapse en tolite clar, te elemento el juris robiendo millo prevenza de cooperante de prevencibil acceso al collapse. Dr. Warren studió the technical readouts from the projection system. Inograt sin bien real temporal intervencibil acceso no collapse. Dr. Warren studió the technical readouts from the projection system. Our equipment is already approaching the theoretical limits of what we thought was possible. How much more advanced can these capabilities become? The temporal technology you are developing represents only the beginning of what is possible. In our timeline, temporal observation and intervention are routine capabilities to historical research, crisis prevention, and exploration of alternative timeline possibilities. Marcus Ross commented enveloping entire team, are we fundamentally changing human nature by developing these capabilities? Will humanages in the future still be recognizably human? Humanages in the future still be recognizably human? Humanages decision our timeline has evolved beyond your current capabilities, but the core values and characteristics that define human nature remain unchanged. Temporal capabilities enhance human potential rather than replacing it. The consciousness expansion necessary for temporal projection actually strengthens empathy, wisdom, and understanding of consequences. As the consultación continued, Sarah realized a lo cuanto presentino haplo con voz y enebunatirie macento lagrado, que Sarah ircola psicolicane, de durante destinelado, tescabuite shobi es lo destos tu podicote, de gesto pero waso de mérito sarabo duratum ser combetumbo. Volte son polvorizado, vos autoridegento tus rachos de caboneros combreto prático ácido entre consultitio. Bona penoso paratico narniqueso podigante en lo refamanto. Bona casado marasavicotojus, tos cabute saurias caballas, tos finimen shovandao jomtetio. Volta penose predumase con chuames. Bona casopa do romantis dos abristo atendiado respediogeso. Deslano to dropo coño. Desconsulato tu alorer la vertir las lamelos. Te baus para boconio, da sutura bora do bos barado. Giran teretiga bolsa cabesta bordo mas lo masodom. The Observer Temporal 7. On behalf of the United States government and the human species, y want to express our gratitude for the guidance you have provided. What assurances can you give us that this temporal intervention is truly in humanity's best interests? President Walsh, the Temporal Observation Project exists because humanity in our timeline chose to protect and guide its own past. We are not external forces manipulating your development. We are your descendientes o médico de futuro cuanta jung se imposible e se intervenciones e mostraron tu lot natural evolución. Diaune codo jaunio comparacabia moto, diaune comparacabia moxesure, en vrasa jungs to bitermastos. Tokos de hjorati tu qualon to den bada jom mastera. Tres prisaus famebadantia. Trifor gemus of babalober la ciudad jung, bozarin zetes to the fetting nicum, diaune comostuda tu en napri for abioto de la roda rakie, ducuson carijobo. Dorisa deshacer knisturo darizo knista propte. If your timeline develops in ways que son precautiono to create better outcomes than we achieved, we will adapt for workas har en chiso, we will adapt for workas har en open the folly method, no hiccups of padawa, en tokenanes por todo wanda, y comentigar abierta traffic outcomes que will some civilization entirely. As the consultation concluded, Sarah felt the weight of expanded responsibilities settling upon the team. They were no longer just preventing immediate crises. They were hoping Guyalin manetes evolution onto a species capable of mastering time itself. Dr. Warren powered down the projection system as the connection with the temporal observers faded. Phase 2 begins immediately. We need to identify and recruit additional team members while developing more advanced temporal capabilities. Agent Morrison activated their communication systems to begin the recruitment process. Il coordinate quante legies agencias interfio candidatos quante necessari qualificas des psychological profiles. Seran reacrauntar her colleagues, realizing that an ordinary small archaeological team had become the nucleus of humanity's most important project. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the opportunity to help guide human civilization toward the future of unprecedented capability and wisdom. The Brooklyn Bridge, visible through the facility's windows, stood as a reminder of human achievement and the power of engineering to connect previously separated realms. Now they were building bridges across time itself, connecting humanity's past and future in ways that could ensure the survival and flourishing of human civilization across the centuries. The hidden message in the Mapon photograph revealed not just evidence of temporal observation, but to humanity's destiny as a species capable of transcending the limitations of linear time. It was the pioneers who would help make that destiny a reality. 1 year after the successful completion of Phase 1 critical decisions, the Temporal Research Foundation had evolved into a global network of carefully selected individuals working to guide humanity's development across multiple timelines. Sarah stood in the expanded facility's main operations center, watching displays that showed temporal stability readings from around the world. The recruitment of additional team members had proceeded exactly as the temporal observers had predicted. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a quantum physicist pro CERN, had ella joined after demonstrating natural aptitude for consistent projection. General Robert Harrison, former head of the Pentagon's Advanced Research Division, provided military and strategic expertise. Dr. Amara Okafor, a philosopher of physicist pro Oxford, helped ensure the temporal interventions remained aligned with human values and moral principles. Temporal stability readings are holding steady across all monitored timelines, Dr. Chen report of potasustación. The probability of catastrophic timeline variations has decreased to 3%, the lowest level recorded since the project began. Sarah felt que India valodro progrese mal. She also understood the labor quancia fa bobado progrese, y temporal observers ha por 2,2%. Nando so anayin pari favdo duman, se presento pelto de fundi challenges, amo Warren activero de Quantum Projection System por todes weekly consultation by this temporal observation network. The technology has advanced significantly over the past year, allowing for more detailed communication and longer projection sessions. Observer Temporal Sede, the enlisted Temporal Research Foundation reporting on Phase 2 progress, Sarah announced as she entered the projection chamber. The response ended immediately, carrying undertones satisfaction and anticipation. Temporal Research Foundation, your progress continues to exceed all projections. The global network you have established has successfully prevented 70 potential crisis events and guided optimal outcomes in 43 critical decision points. Dr. Vasquez, participating in her first direct temporal consultation, asked, "What can you tell us about the long-term implications of our interventions? Are we creating a better futuro, or simply ensuring a specific timeline comes to pass?" Dr. Vasquez, the timeline que emerges pro contra interventions is already superior to the one we originated for. Your generation's wisdom and caution in developing temporal capabilities has led to outcomes that exceed our historical achievements. You are not recreating our past, you are creating a better futuro. De revolution, wyborning podot sonto impiuba al observer a son timeline, we both thrilling and sobering. Sara realize, jak Sara moved tonto pioba sando it malor impiuing guidance, from an spoil of a biuwe granava docunet day, vulas lofin tam, hosi along it is, sovden, in erin pov sene pivu holchiduan nada, do hacker solve in telepotunada rodoite resia, el badogs of it all serie. How do we handle potential competing temporal interventions? General Harrison, the emergence of multiple temporal research programs was anticipated and is actually beneficial for teamline stability. Cooperation between temporal research groups prevents any single organization from having excessive influence over human development. We will facilitate coordination between legitimate and temporal research programs while helping you identify and counter any groups that might misuse temporal technology. Dr. Okafor leaned forward. What ethical guidelines should govern our expanded temporal intervention capabilities? As our power to influence history increases, so does our responsibility to use the power wisely. Dr. Okafor leaned forward. What ethical guidelines should govern our expanded temporal intervention capabilities? As our power to influence history increases, so does our responsibility to use the power wisely. Okafor. The ethical framework que sigue reglas temporal intervención is based on tres fundamental principles: preservación a human free will, prevención a catastrophic outcomes, and enhancement of our human potential. All interventions must serve these principles while respecting the natural development of human consciousness and civilization. As the consultation continued, Observe Temporal CB provided detailed briefings on the next phase of their development. The information was staggering in its scope and implications. Phase 3 involves preparation for humanity's transition to a truly temporal civilization. Within the next decade, your timeline will develop the capability for routine temporal observation and limited historical intervention. This transition must be managed carefully to prevent temporal paradoxes and ensure that the technology is used responsibly. Dr. Transition must be managed carefully to prevent temporal paradoxes and ensure that the technology is used responsibly. Dr. Transition must be managed carefully to prevent temporal paradoxes and ensure that the technology is used responsibly. Chen estudió de technical specifications being transmitted through the projection interface. The consciousness enhancement procedures described here would fundamentally alter human cognitive capabilities. Are we talking about the evolution of humanity into a different species? Not a different species, but an enhanced version of humanity with expanded consciousness and temporal awareness. The enhancement process is gradual and voluntary, preserving human nature while expanding human potential. Those who undergo enhancement retain as essential humanity while gaining the ability to perceive and interact with temporal dimensions. Sarah felt Temporal 7. If we proceed with consciousness enhancement and temporal civilization development, there will be no returning to our current level of existence. Are we prepared por atos transformación? Dr. Chen, estidacio verestia, Stilanto pare precisamente abondotut, tutor de la venedito, listo antijumonibus servas guardials. En mi prisión felizadas de ziple felizando gaventu lomthals, in isto profrisunis agion porvan, por l'espelendo de temocralice sin los haciendo de swiplichon porul. Agian Morrison, monitoring the consultation from the Operations Center, vendo practical concern. What about the social and political implications of consciousness hanfan? Could we prevent the creation of a temporal elite que dominatis un enhanced humans? Agent Morrison, the consciousness hanfan professes includes built-in safeguard that for an empathy, wisdom, and commitment to human welfare. Enhanced individuals become more committed to protecting and serving humanity. not less. The technology cannot be used to create o procevo hierarchies, pocosendo din hon fan a processil proven sax motivaciones. Ad una consultación conclude, Sarah realized mayo conado a proquina threshold, taco fundamentally transformon civilization. Taco archaeological discovery que tanes de start the journey had led them to the brink of humanity's evolution into a temporal species capable of transcending the limitations of linear time. Dr. Warren powered down the projection system as the team gathered ticus de samtenu discuss the implication de Wadiabo Lenkermor, where dicustes as conta forces de genagissims implications comoro por las paquia us comantelonar. Wespom sitibelciten was and overwhelming. Dr. Vasquez nodded thoughtfully. But to consider the alternative, if we don't guide this development responsibly, temporal technology could be developed around groups with less ethical constraints. At least we have other goims even now ma futul of other map, witos todos opremaziguis choices. General Harrison Brown about the strategic consideration. We need to begin preparing government and military leadership for the eventual revelation of temporal technology. The transition to a temporal civilization will require unprecedented level of international cooperation. Dr. Okafor raised the fundamental ethical question. Are we prepared to take responsibility for regarding humanity's evolution into something beyond the kinship per la molesty? The consciousness enhanced and described by the temporal observers could create humans with capabilities we can barely imagine. Sarah looked around at her colleagues, seeing the mixture of excitement and apprehension in their faces. They had come so far from the simple archaeological team that had discovered a mysterious photograph near the Brooklyn Bridge. Now they were being asked to follow and pose el fenico minatira da que penchari humanum tabum boru enunciato de el faulium of na temporal civilization. The temporal observers have been clear that this transformation is voluntary and gradual, she thought finally. We're not forcing change on humanity, we're providing the opportunity for those who choose it to develop enhanced capabilities while protecting those who prefer to remain as they are. Marcus, who had been studying the historical implications of their work, spoke up, even analyzing the pattern of human development throughout history. Every major advancement, agriculture, writing, industrialization, digital technology, has involved fundamental changes in human capabilities consciousness. Temporal enhancement may be the next natural step in human evolution. Dr. Chen activated displays showing the technical specifications for consciousness enhancement technology. The science is sound and the safeguards appear comprehensive. If we proceed carefully and maintain ethical oversight, we can allow humanity to develop capabilities que then ensure that survival and flourishing for millennia. As the team prepared to make recommendations to world leaders about humanity's temporal future, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary journey it brought them to this point. The hidden message in a century-old photograph had revealed not just evidence of time travel, but to humanity's destiny as a species capable of mastering time itself. The Brooklyn Bridge, still standing majestically in the distance, had been the focal point for humanity's first contact with its temporal future. Now they were preparing to help all of humanity cross a bridge into a future of unprecedented possibility and responsibility. The archaeological discovery of humanity's greatest adventure, the development of consciousness and capabilities that would allow the species to explore not just the universe, but the infinite possibilities of time itself. Erichtonen, the moral of Concila, the incredible future reality. The futura was no longer a distant destination, it should in partnership between past, present and futura, working together to ensure humanity would not just survive, but thrive across all the dimensions of space and time.
The Akun message had been revealed, and its meaning was clear. Humanity's greatest discoveries lay not in the past, but in its own unlimited potential to transcend every boundary and explore every possibility the universe had to offer.
As Sarah stood before the United Nations General Assembly 6 months later, she reflected on how far they had come from their dusty excavation site near the Brooklyn Bridge. The revelation of temporal technology to world leaders had proceeded exactly as the temporal observers had predicted, with initial skepticism giving way to awe and down to careful consideration of the implications. The demonstration of consciousness projection technology had been the turning point. When delegates witnessed Vasquez successfully project her consciousness back to observe the signing of the UN Charter, in 1945, providing details that could only have been obtained through direct observation. Even the most skeptical representatives had to acknowledge the reality of temporal capabilities. Distinguished delegate, Sarah began, her voice carrying across the assembly hall. We stand at a threshold that will define the future of human civilization. The temporal technology we have developed offers unprecedented opportunities for understanding our past, preventing future catastrophes, and expanding human consciousness beyond anything we have previously imagined. The presentation that followed outlined the careful framework that had been developed for humanity's transition to temporal civilization. The consciousness enhancement process would be voluntary and gradual, with extensive safeguards to prevent misuse. International oversight committees would ensure that temporal technology served all of humanity rather than creating new forms of inequality or oppression. Dr. Chen presented the technical aspects of the temporal civilization framework. The consciousness enhancement process begins with temporary projection capabilities that allow individuals to experience expanded awareness without permanent changes. Those who choose to proceed can gradually develop enhanced cognitive abilities while retaining their essential humanity and moral foundations. General Harrison addressed the security implications. Temporal technology will be governed by international treaties that prevent its use for military aggression or historical manipulation. Enhanced individuals will serve as guardians of temporal stability, working together across all nations to prevent catastrophic timeline variations. Okafor outlined a theoretical framework that would guide temporal civilization development. Every aspect of this technology has been designed to strengthen human values rather than compromise them. The consciousness enhancement process actually increases empathy, wisdom, and commitment to human welfare. We are not creating superhuman overlords. We are developing insane humans dedicated to serving and protecting all of humanity. The debate that followed was intense but respectful. Representatives from every nation raised concerns about sovereignty, equality, and the fundamental nature of human existence. But the evidence of temporal technology's benefits and the comprehensive safeguards that had been developed gradually built consensus for moving forward. The vote, when it came, was overwhelming. 107 nations voted to approve the Temporal Civilization Development Treaty, establishing the framework for humanity's gradual transition to temporal capabilities under international oversight. As Sarah watched the vote tally appear on the Assembly Hall's displays, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment mixed with the sobering realization that the real work was just beginning. The approval of the treaty was only the first step in a process that would unfold over decades. Warren activated a secure communication link to the Temporal Research Foundation's Operations Center. Observer Temporal 7, the UN has approved the Temporal Civilization Development Treaty. We're ready to begin Phase 3 implementation. The response came with what felt like celebration and deep satisfaction. Temporal Research Foundation, this outcome exceeds even our most optimistic projections. The wisdom and caution your timeline has shown in developing temporal capabilities has created possibilities that we never achieved in our original development. You are not just recreating our past, you are creating a superior future for all of humanity. Over the following months, the first consciousness enhancement centers were established in major cities around the world. The volunteers who participated in the initial enhancement programs were carefully selected for their psychological stability, ethical commitment, and dedication to human welfare. Sarah was among the first to undergo the consciousness enhancement process. As she lay in the enhancement chamber, feeling her awareness gradually expand beyond the normal boundaries of human perception, she experienced a profound transformation in her understanding of existence itself. The enhanced consciousness allowed her to perceive time, not as a linear progression, but as a vast landscape that could be explored and understood. She could sense the connections between past, present, and future events, understanding how small actions created ripple effects that extended across centuries. But more importantly, the enhancement strengthened her empathy and wisdom. She could feel the hopes, fears, and dreams of humanity across all time periods, creating an unshakable commitment to protecting and nurturing human civilization in all its forms. Vasquez, who underwent enhancement at the same time, described the experience as becoming more human rather than less. The expanded consciousness didn't diminish human emotions or connections. It deepened them, creating a profound appreciation for the beauty and potential of human existence. As the first generation of enhanced humans began their work as temporal guardians, they established protocols for responsible timeline observation and intervention. Small teams of enhanced individuals monitored critical contours throughout history, making subtle adjustments when necessary to prevent catastrophic outcomes while preserving human free will and natural development. The Archaeologists team that had started the journey remained at the center of the temporal civilization project. Marcus became a specialist in historical timeline analysis, using his enhanced consciousness to understand the complex patterns of cause and effect that shaped human development. Tiamis focused on temporal ethics, ensuring that all interventions served humanity's best interests while respecting the natural flow of history. Chen led the development of even more advanced temporal technologies, including the ability to explore alternative timeline possibilities and communicate with parallel versions of human civilization that had developed differently. These capabilities opened up infinite possibilities for learning and growth. The Brooklyn Bridge, where their journey had begun, became a symbol of humanity's transition to temporal civilization. A memorial was established at the site where they had discovered the 1901 photograph, honoring both the temporal observer who had guided humanity's development and the archaeological team that had uncovered the truth about humanity's temporal destiny. As Sarah stood on the Brooklyn Bridge one evening, her enhanced consciousness allowing her to perceive the temporal currents that flowed around the historic structure, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought humanity to this point. The hidden message in a century-old photograph had revealed not just evidence of time travel, but humanity's unlimited potential to transcend every boundary and explore every possibility. The future stretched out before them like an infinite landscape of possibility. Enhanced humans worked alongside their unenhanced colleagues to explore the universe, prevent catastrophic events, and guide the development of consciousness and civilization across multiple timelines. Humanity had become not just a temporal species, but a guardian of existence itself, dedicated to protecting and nurturing life and consciousness wherever it emerged. The archaeological discovery that had started as a simple excavation near the Brooklyn Bridge had become humanity's greatest adventure. The development of capabilities that allowed the species to transcend the limitations of space and time, while remaining true to the values and connections that defined human nature. The hidden message had been fully revealed, and its meaning was clear. Humanity's greatest discoveries lay not in any external technology or knowledge, but in its own unlimited potential to grow, evolve, and create futures of unprecedented beauty and possibility. The journey that had begun with the mysterious photograph had led to humanity's transformation into something greater than it had ever dreamed possible, while remaining fundamentally and beautifully human. And this was only the beginning. With temporal consciousness and the wisdom to use it responsibly, humanity was ready to explore not just the universe, but the infinite dimensions of existence itself, carrying the light of consciousness and compassion into every corner of space and time. 5 years after the establishment of temporal civilization, Sarah stood once again at the excavation site near the Brooklyn Bridge, where their incredible journey had begun. The small park had been transformed into the Temporal Heritage Memorial, marking the spot where humanity first discovered its connection to its own future. The memorial featured a simple bronze plaque embedded in the ground, marking the exact location where they had unearthed the tin box containing the ancient Olonon photographs. Visitors from around the world came to see the place where humanity's understanding of time and history had been forever changed. Sarah's sunset consciousness allowed her to perceive the temporal echoes of that momentous day when they had first opened the mysterious cache. She could sense the excitement and apprehension of her younger self, the careful scientific methodology of her team, and the profound moment when they realized they had discovered something that would change everything. Chen approached, his own enhanced awareness creating a gentle resonance with hers. The latest reports from the Temporal Guardian Council show perfect timeline stability across all monitored periods, he said. Humanity has successfully transitioned to temporal civilization without creating any of the catastrophic paradoxes we fear. Sarah smiled, feeling the deep satisfaction that came from knowing they had guided humanity through its most important transformation. And the best part is that we've remained fundamentally human throughout the process. Enhanced consciousness has made us more compassionate, not less. Marcus joined them, carrying a tablet displaying the latest archaeological discovery. Even with temporal technology, traditional archaeology remained important for understanding human development and preserving cultural heritage. We've just received confirmation of 3 more temporal artifact caches from different historical periods. It seems that temporal observers left evidence of their presence throughout history, waiting for humanity to develop the wisdom to understand it. James arrived with Dr. Okafor, both of them radiating the calm confidence that came from enhanced consciousness. The Ethics Council has approved the next phase of temporal exploration, James announced. We're ready to begin limited contact with parallel timeline versions of humanity that develop differently. Dr. Okafor nodded thoughtfully. The protocols are comprehensive and the safeguards are extensive. We'll be able to learn from alternative versions of human development while ensuring that no timeline is harmed by the contact. As the sun set behind the Brooklyn Bridge, casting long shadows across the memorial site, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. The archaeological discovery that had seemed so mysterious and impossible had revealed humanity's greatest truth, that consciousness itself was the ultimate frontier, capable of transcending every limitation and exploring every possibility. The enhanced humans who now served as temporal guardians worked tirelessly to protect and nurture human civilization across all timelines, ensuring that the species would continue to grow and evolve while remaining true to the values that defined it as essential humanity. The Brooklyn Bridge stood majestically in the distance, its Gothic towers and suspension cables silhouetted against the evening sky. It remained a symbol of human achievement and the power of engineering to connect previously separated realms. But now it also represented something even greater, humanity's ability to build bridges across time itself, connecting past, present, and future in an eternal partnership dedicated to the flourishing of consciousness and life. The hidden message in the 1901 photograph had been fully revealed, and its meaning resonated across all dimensions of space and time. Humanity's greatest discoveries lay not in any external technology or knowledge, but in its own unlimited potential to transcend every boundary while remaining fundamentally and beautifully human. The archaeological excavation near the Brooklyn Bridge had ended, but humanity's greatest adventure, the exploration of consciousness, time, and infinite possibility, had only just begun.